When you walk down the middle of Main Street, USA, everything feels completely solid. The pavement is bone dry, the lawns are perfectly manicured, the architecture feels heavy, permanent, and safely anchored to the earth. But if you strip away the pavement and the luxury resorts, you are left with the reality of Central Florida. This property sits dead center in an incredibly humid, mosquito-infested swamp. By all normal laws of civil engineering, this incredibly dense complex should be permanently flooded marshland. Pressurized by the massive Floridan aquifer, the local water table sits dangerously high, just inches below the surface. If you dig a 10-foot hole for a basement, you don't get a basement. You get a pool rapidly filling with muddy groundwater. Since digging down was physically impossible, engineers turned to a labor-intensive structural solution that moved the entire city-sized infrastructure above the waterline. They didn't build underground. They built the basement directly on top of the swamp floor. The famous Utilidors beneath the Magic Kingdom are not tunnels. They are the true first floor of the theme park, a sprawling concrete grid built entirely above the natural waterline to house massive power conduits, industrial waste removal systems, and logistical supply chains. To hide this grid and preserve the theatrical illusion, they excavated 7 million cubic yards of earth from a nearby marsh, creating the Seven Seas Lagoon, and hauled that dirt over to the construction site. They piled it completely over and around the concrete corridors, building an artificial hill on top of the swamp. When you stand in front of Cinderella's castle, you are actually standing on the second story. This elevation kept the heavy utilities dry, but paving 43 square miles of previously absorbent marshland broke the local water cycle. Rainwater has nowhere to soak in. It hits the concrete and immediately becomes a fast-moving, destructive sheet flood. When you run the math on a property this size, a severe afternoon thunderstorm can dump billions of gallons of water onto impermeable surfaces in a matter of hours. To catch it, engineers had to build a shadow infrastructure. The gentle, scenic creeks winding alongside the resorts look completely natural, but they are actually highly engineered, mathematically precise drainage arteries. The property is laced with over 40 miles of these primary interconnected canals. Every human-facing space is precisely graded, so water flows into gutters, into underground pipes, and out into this gravity-fed system, which routes the runoff down into specifically engineered retention basins. But if a massive storm, like a direct hit from an Atlantic hurricane, drops a foot of rain in a single day, the volume overwhelms the gravity system. The retention basins reach capacity, the canals back up, and the resort effectively drowns from the inside out. To fight back, the infrastructure uses an active control system. Throughout the canal network are automated mechanical weirs, heavy steel gates that can be raised or lowered to control the flow and level of the water. These are connected to a central hydrological command network that monitors the property 24 hours a day. 72 hours before a hurricane makes landfall, water managers initiate a preemptive protocol. They open the mechanical weirs and aggressively drain water out of the retention ponds and canals, intentionally lowering the water levels across the resort far below normal. Essentially, they are emptying the bathtub. By the time the storm hits, the system is artificially empty. When millions of gallons of rainwater flood into the drains, the empty canals easily absorb the shock, entirely bypassing the human-facing infrastructure. But you cannot simply take billions of gallons of untreated runoff from highways and parking lots and dump it directly into the fragile Florida Everglades. This water carries motor oils, heavy sediments, and debris that would cause massive ecological destruction. So the final stage of the machine mimics the swamp it replaced. Before the water leaves the property, it is routed into specially designed shallow wetland areas where it spreads out, loses its kinetic energy, and is slowed to a crawl. As the water sits in these basins, physics and biology take over. Heavy sediments drop to the bottom, while the deep root systems of native aquatic plants perform phytoremediation, actively scrubbing pollutants, oils, and excess nutrients right out of the water. Only after this biological scrubbing is the cleansed water allowed to slip silently past the property line and back into the natural Florida watershed. This closed loop is the reason the pavement on Main Street stays dry even after a torrential downpour. Every guest in the park is walking across the surface of an invisible machine that relentlessly holds back the swamp.